Okay, we finished our chores. Ready to do a little storm watch. Brittany Wouch. Let's go to that one there. I'm going to share it, but we're going to search Hurricane Milton. Just going to search regular for now. We're going to go into the conspiracy stuff in a minute. Let's throw on the headphones so I can hear what's being said on these vidges. All right. If you're just joining me now, please do share the live. All right. Slams Florida's. Okay, latest.
We do have breaking news. Millions without power this morning after Hurricane Milton slammed through the state of Florida.
It made landfall as a Category 3 storm south of Tampa. Eyewitness News reporter Mark Robles is live in studio with a look at the devastation.
Yeah, Irene, John, we knew this was going to be a bad one. It took less than 8 hours to cross the Florida peninsula. The storm now heading out into the Atlantic Ocean as a Category 1 hurricane. Now, deaths have been confirmed specifically in St. Lucie County. That is on Florida's Atlantic coast. We just got some new video in. This shows right here search and rescue crews working right now to rescue residents from their apartments in Clearwater, Florida. That is near Tampa. It is unclear how many people need to be rescued, but that operation underway this morning from that second floor of the apartment complex you can see. When Milton made landfall, it was a Category 3 storm with 120-mile-per-hour winds. Part of the roof of Tropicana Field, home of the Tampa Bay Rays, it actually ripped off in this storm. And take a look here in St. Petersburg, a construction crane came crashing down after authorities, they had warned that there wasn't enough time to secure it. Even before the storm made landfall, an outbreak of tornadoes cut across the state. Officials reported the most warnings a single day on record, nearly 120. 19 were confirmed, leaving homes destroyed, numerous areas reporting damage as well. Even a 10,000 square foot sheriff's facility in St. Lucie County was destroyed. Listen here to one man and how his family survived.
We all started going for the hallway. Didn't even make it there in time. Started toot, and I heard a piece of glass crack and sucked the whole roof off. And I felt the thing suck me up. I grabbed my kid and my wife and hunkered down.
Our deputies are out here. The fire district is out here. We're going through the rubble. We're trying to provide recover anybody that we can, provide whatever help that we can.
The predicted storm surge up to 13 feet, flooding densely populated areas along the coast, including Fort Myers. On top of all of that, it's left more than 3 million homes and businesses without power. The governor says 9,000 National Guardsmen have been mobilized to respond to the storm, along with 1,400 search and rescue first responders. All of that underway this morning. Milton is the third hurricane to make landfall in Florida this year, and that does tie a record. In more than 150 years. It's only happened 5 other times. John, we'll send it back to you.
Yeah, and this one was a direct hit. Okay, Mark, thanks. 70 more California firefighters are being sent to Florida to help with Hurricane Milton response efforts. The group includes 33 people from the Orange County Fire Authority and Anaheim and Orange Fire Departments. This is in addition to the LAFD and LA County firefighters that were sent out earlier this week. In all, California has now deployed 354 personnel to support hurricane response efforts.
As Hurricane Milton tears across Florida, the federal government is poised to respond.
We are prepared for this. We will certainly have challenges along the way as we move people around, but this is what we're good at. This is what we plan for.
FEMA says thousands of personnel are on the ground and that the agency has more than $11 billion in its disaster relief funds. Following the federal emergency declaration, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis activated 5,000 National Guard troops. Search and rescue teams are already rescuing people by air, ground, and by water. Meantime, more people are now pushing back on former President Trump's claims that the federal government is withholding disaster aid to Republican states.
A lot of this stuff is not about the people that got impacted. It's about people wanting to make themselves seem important, say stuff that's just outlandish, trying to get clicks and attention that has nothing to do with getting information to the public.
People living in the storm zone got a $750 payment to get immediate shelter or food. Larger grants will be distributed in the coming months.
Hello, I'm Mark Brown. Get more great ABC7 content by clicking the subscribe button for our YouTube channel and download the ABC7 Los Angeles streaming app on Fire TV, Android TV, Apple TV, and Roku to watch on your TV.
Hurricane Milton made landfall last night, leaving 3 million homes and businesses without power. In St. Lucie County, 4 people were killed when a dozen tornadoes touched down. Drone footage in Venice captured a destroyed pier, debris left on roads, as well as damaged cars.
And then in St. Petersburg, a crane collapse left a gaping hole in an office building. No injuries were reported. The hurricane also ripped off Tropicana Field. That's the Tampa Bay Rays Stadium that was actually being used as a staging site for responders. The roof panels were ripped to shreds with debris littering the field and much of the seating areas.
We have team coverage on all of this for you. Lonnie Quinn tracking the movement of Milton. Rob Marciano live in Port Pierce, Florida. But we begin with Dick Brennan here now with the latest on the damage, and there is a lot, Dick.
There indeed is, Maurice. At this hour, authorities are still conducting rescues of people caught up in the flooding. Governor Ron DeSantis just said they have engaged in over 125 missions in 26 counties, and they're still going through structures damaged by tornadoes. It was a miraculous rescue in Clearwater. Authorities came to the aid of a 14-year-old boy who had been floating on a fence in the aftermath of Hurricane Milton. And first responders also rescued residents of an apartment complex using boats and elevated vehicles. Some say they had to rush to higher floors to escape the floodwaters that was cascading in. Others were taken to safety in Tampa.
I was in bed, obviously, and I didn't realize it was flooded at first. The water was so cold, Oh, man, it's just, and I'm missing a shoe, my brace shoe, and I don't know where it is, my rim floating around somewhere.
Many waded in waist-deep waters as they surveyed the destruction.
You guys out there want to do something, start praying. That's the only thing that's going to fix this.
The storm surge left streets inundated. In Orange City, paved roads were ripped to shreds.
Please be careful, Dad.
Angie Dooley and her father, Scott, fled their home.
Oh, my God.
They got into their car in Daytona Beach and took off for safety. You needed a big SUV if you were going to get through the water.
Oh! Violent tornado, violent.
The storm is also blamed for an outbreak of tornadoes, some of them deadly, even before it made landfall.
It was like watching the movie Twister, and you could see the debris field through it, and it was landing in the lake. And then all of a sudden, a spear like a 2x4 flew by and stuck into my backyard.
Power lines are down, leaving millions without electricity.
He got Benji.
In Fort Pierce, residents managed to rescue Benji the dog from tornado rubble. Unfortunately, his owners were killed. Authorities say they're doing their best to evaluate the damage across the region.
What we're seeing is a lot of progress in Florida already toward getting key transportation networks restored, getting those resources in to help people get back to normal.
Now, the governor reports the state had 4 million power outages, but some 880,000 have already been restored, and 50,000 linemen and women are still at work. So much more to do. Christina Maurice.
That is the truth. Dick Brennan, thank you.
Thank you, Dick. And our team coverage continues now with Rob Marciano. He is in Fort Pierce, Florida. He moved over to the east side of the state now. Rob, let's talk a bit more about those tornadoes. I've been hearing the word supercharged. What exactly is that?
Well, yeah, the National Hurricane Center director used that term in an interview, and it was an unusual setup. Look, we always get tornadoes at a head of a hurricane in the right front quadrant. The storm comes in, the surface winds interact with the land, that friction kind of turns the winds a little bit more, and then we create that shear that helps develop tornadoes. But usually they're pretty small and not that many. Well, in this case, we had warm, humid air out ahead of it. And that same trough that we were talking about so much all week, and Lonnie was mentioning this too, that it would weaken Milton. And it did, thankfully. But that same trough kind of acted to increase the wind shear that helped these tornadoes become, I guess you can say a turbocharge, if you will. And unfortunately, we have we have damage like this. This is pretty bad stuff. Established homes with the roofs ripped off, these beautiful big live oaks coming crashing down, not just on the homes, but taking this car out as well. The neighbors tell me that two women live here and that they likely evacuated. And if that's the case, a very wise move before this storm came in. This entire neighborhood is littered. We're not too far where those folks lost their lives in the next county just to our south. So this area got peppered with over a dozen tornadoes confirmed on the ground and taking out a number of structures and doing some serious damage across this part of Florida. And as you know, on the eastern side of the state, not even where it made landfall.
Yeah, Rob, talk to us a little bit more about the damage. I mean, going in, we heard these dire predictions. And was it what you expected, about the same, or more so or less than? What do you think?
I mean, honestly, where it made landfall, in that part of Florida, you go Naples up through Sarasota and then Tampa, it's really well built. A lot of the structures are solid. They're low to the ground. There's not many high trees. So they fared pretty well with the winds. The surge, especially down towards Port Charlotte, I mean, they got some big time surge, and there's locally damage from surge on the West Coast and on the East Coast. There's no doubt about that. But I think they fared pretty well with the wind. It's these tornadoes really that were the surprise factor. We always expect tornadoes, but not this many and not this strong, guys.
Rob Marciano reporting us from Fort Pierce. Thank you, Rob.
All right, great insight there. Thank you. We're turning now to the track of Milton.
Lonnie is here with the latest on that.
And you guys, the question we've all been fielding is this going to be affecting us? Is it to make a curve come into our area? Let me talk you through everything. So, latest from the National Hurricane Center, it's offshore, all right, 700 miles west of Bermuda. Is this going to make the turn? The fact is, everyone says no. National Hurricane Center has put out their official track. This goes straight out to sea, weakening as it moves along. So now, the next question that this begs is, do you buy it? Could there be that wobble? You know what? I would buy this 100%. And the reason is, I want to show you the history of the storm. This, gang, you're never going to believe this. This is the very first cone that was issued on Tropical Storm Milton. It was way back here by Mexico. This was issued on Saturday. Look at this. I need to show you. Let's zoom in tight here. Look at the skinny line they draw for where landfall would most likely be. If you can zoom in tight on that one, guys, that's what we're looking for right there. Look at this. This is what they predicted on Saturday. The first time they ever studied the storm, the landfall ended up being right about here. That's 12 miles to the south. Had it been 12 miles to the north, Rob and I have been talking about this. If it was right here, boy, it would have just pummeled all that water into Tampa Bay. That is the most susceptible bay on the west coast of Florida to storm surge. It didn't get it. As a matter of fact, at the height of the storm, the water was pushed outward. So that's one of the saving graces. The other one is this now goes out to the fish. It's not coming anywhere close to land. It gets farther and farther away. Guys, it's all yours.
Thank you, Lonnie.
And help from our areas on the way to the people in Florida. A volunteer with American Red Cross of northern New Jersey making the drive in the mission response vehicle to those affected by the hurricane.
The mission response vehicle will be delivering food, emergency supplies, water, and snacks to some of the harder hit areas.
It gives me it's hard to describe the feeling. It's a feeling of, I don't know, satisfaction, just feeling good. It sounds silly, but it's nice to be able to give something back after all these years.
This team will be stopping in Philadelphia to pick up other disaster workers and another vehicle before heading to Tallahassee. The Red Cross says that if you want to help in the hurricane relief, you can donate blood, volunteer to help in the response, or even make a financial donation. We, of course, have much more Hurricane Milton coverage here for you. Coming up at 5:30, how highly trained Long Island airmen are helping in the recovery efforts. And if you would like to help victims, you can find some more information on that at cbsnewyork.com.
All right, next fucking video. These are all news reports. I don't want to hear fucking news reports. Let's get into the conspiracy stuff here. All right, Milton conspiracy. Truth or fake? Let's try it.
Up next, it's time for Truth or Fake. Catalina Marchand-Abreu is here in studio. Catalina, you're going back to our main story this evening, Hurricane Milton, and some of the conspiracy theories that are circulating online, claiming that the US government is using certain geoengineering technologies to control the weather. What's that all about?
Some users, mainly pro-Trump users online, that is, claim that the government is using technology to manipulate weather patterns and storms. As this user claims, I grew up in the Gulf of Mexico, been watching storms since I was a young boy. I have never seen a storm start here in the Gulf of Mexico and go east. In this posting over 6 million times on X, as others such as Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene seems to have an explanation for this in this posting over 5 million times on X. She says, yes, they, referring to the government, can control the weather. Here is Obama CIA Director John Brennan talking about it. She adds this video where John Brennan is referring to what's called the implementation of geoengineering. So let's take a look at the video. Here I've summarized the important bits for you, where we hear him mentioning SAI technology, which stands for stratospheric aerosol injection. That could help reverse the warming effects of global climate change. Where John Brennan is allegedly in this video admitting to the implementation of a plan to use geoengineering technology to control weather.
What information do we have then in regard to these claims about climate changing technologies, Catalina?
Yo, Beyonce.
Well, Sharon, these are actually misleading narratives recurrent every time there is a climate disaster. As for this post claiming that there has never been a storm that start in the Gulf of Mexico, we have proof otherwise. In 2021, for example, there was Cyclone Claudette that started in the Gulf of Mexico to then head west, as you can see in the map. Then back in September, there was also Tropical Storm Francine. And finally, back in July, even Storm Beryl. So many other storms, at least 3 we have, that began in the Gulf of Mexico besides Milton. Then this video that Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene posted is out of context. There are actually no credible reports that the CIA director ever announced plans to implement geoengineering technology to change weather patterns. This video actually shows a general discussion on the topic of geoengineering from a 2016 conference. However, they're not discussing the implementation of such technologies. Additionally, SIA, the technology they mention, is still being developed and studied and implemented slowly, could have a significant geopolitical impact, according to MIT, who say that this technology could benefit some regions at the expense of others. Nevertheless, a widely implemented weather modification technology is cloud seeding. You may have heard of it before. This involves manipulating existing clouds to help produce more rain, technology that is used in over 50 countries, including the US, China, Switzerland, and more famously in Dubai, when there was widespread speculation that cloud seeding technology was behind the major floods that hit the city back in April.
Finally, a lot of misinformation as well online regarding the government's response to Hurricane Helene. Let's clarify some of that as well, Catalina.
In the weeks since Hurricane Helene hit some parts of the U.S., misinformation about the government's response has been spreading on social media, especially amplified by former President Donald Trump and his allies. The first major claim, Trump says that Kamala Harris has stolen and spent all her FEMA money, billions, he says, billions of dollars of FEMA money, to give it to illegal immigrants for housing. The second major claim is that Kamala Harris announced that hurricane victims are only getting $750 from FEMA. So following these fake claims, as our business editor very well said, as there were so many, FEMA did set up a fact-checking page on their website to clarify this misinformation. As to the $750 claim, they say that this is obviously lacking evidence, since FEMA says that this is what hurricane victims receive as an upfront payment to help cover costs of food, water, and other emergency supplies. And following this initial payment, they can receive more funds following an assessment. Then regarding the claim that FEMA funds have been diverted to give to immigrants, FEMA clarifies that $640 million in funds have been set aside for migrant assistance for the 2024 fiscal year. However, they also deny claims that the FEMA disaster response funds have been diverted to support migrants or border-related issues. So two different budgets for two different things. One is for migrants, one is for disaster relief funds. However, in 2019, when Donald Trump was president, money was diverted from FEMA's disaster relief fund, about $38 million, to give to the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency. Ironic enough.
Catalina, thank you so much for clarifying all of that for us. Do stay with us. We'll be right back with more world news.
Joining me now is Abby Richards, a misinformation researcher and climate activist. Abby, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Hurricane Helene, of course, hit the state quite hard, and now Milton as well. What kinds of misinformation has been spreading, particularly over the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, I'm seeing so much misinformation spreading in regards to relief efforts after Hurricane Helene right now. Just seeing lots of narratives about, especially FEMA and so our assistance efforts that FEMA is trying to bring into those areas, saying that FEMA can't be trusted, that they're confiscating land from people, trying to kick people off their lands, saying that they are not allowing supplies in. So when people are trying to bring in aid, that FEMA is somehow denying that. None of these are true. And they're brewing all sorts of different narratives of distrust.
Well, people are not being handled properly in a storm situation. A storm that we knew that was coming for so long. And we're not even prepared for it in the biggest storm states of the fucking world. It's just so bad. It's so bad. People are stuck on the roofs for days. It's bad. They were saying earlier, oh, we got an extra 450 people to help over there. Whoop-de-fucking-do. We need hundreds of thousands of extra people over there. Let's check this one out.
Tornadoes, and these things are really tough. And we did see which is standard with these hurricanes, but you saw the tornadoes, and they did do some significant damage, even all the way over on the east coast of Florida. We've also been able to tour. We did a driving tour of Siesta Key, was able to see some of the damage that was out there. Also saw what appeared to me to be some of the leftover debris from Helene that was, out in the street or whatnot. So we got a sense of what's going on there. Then, of course, here, we're here looking. I mean, there's damage behind me with some of these. Honestly, for the mobile home stuff, I thought there would be more roofs. So some of these mobile homes, I mean, they've done a lot better in Florida over the years. We flew in over a number of the communities as well. There were definitely some roofs that were really bad, but then there were others that did really well. Another thing I think I can say just by doing our tour with Siesta Key, I mean, our buildings that were built, in the last 20, 30 years, I mean, they did very well. They look good. There was obviously damage. There were trees. Some of the structures were damaged. But, you have some of those newer homes that have been built with more updated building code. They seem to fare very well. So we'll see as the damage assessments come in and as the reports. Now, we have at the state level, we're continuing supporting search and rescue operations. As of this afternoon, at least 340 individuals and 49 pets have been rescued. Florida National Guard, Florida law enforcement, and urban search and rescue teams are continuing to work throughout the day. We've got a lot of rescue craft operational. Hundreds of rescuers are engaged in over 125 missions in 26 counties. Some of that's in conjunction with the local law enforcement and fire and other first responders. I know a lot of the sheriffs are doing a lot of good work. This storm came in the way it did. The dirty side of the storm was kind of Sarasota, Charlotte area. And then the northern side of the storm, it actually said storm surge into Tampa Bay, it sucked it out, but the northern side of the storm had a lot of precipitation. I mean, they were just getting water dumped on them. So whereas Helene created a lot of storm surge in that part of the state, this one didn't do that there, but it created.
No. He brought his own fucking heli. That's
Like
sick.
inland flooding, and you're going to so you see that in Pinellas and Hillsborough counties. You also got an awful lot of water dumped in the center and northern parts of the state on the northern side of the storm. So we're going to continue to respond for those as appropriate. Power. So as of the 3 p.m. update, we've got 3.2 million that are without power. 3.2 million accounts throughout the state of Florida. Since the storm hit, 880,000 have been restored. So we've basically had a storm that's had over 4 million power outages. I think that's probably similar to what we saw with Hurricanes Irma and Hurricanes Ian. And I know but on this one, we have 50,000 linemen. We had probably 40-some thousand for Ian. I don't think they had them presaged for Irma, but we've got over 50,000 linemen. So they are hard at work. I know this area is FPL. I know they're planning a big push. So we feel very confident that those folks are working very hard, and you're going to see some good stuff here in the ensuing time period. Sarasota County, where we are now, is about 66% out as we speak. Prior to landfall here in Sarasota, we staged thousands of sandbags, 9 high water vehicles, 3 high wheeled vehicles for search and rescue, 12 emergency sat phones, 4 urban search and rescue teams, and 2 swift water teams. And now we are continuing to help with 25 additional generators, 3 swamp buggies, FWC search and rescue boats, 3 mobile command vehicles, 4 ambulance strike teams, 4,000 gallons of diesel, 4,000 gallons of regular unleaded, 5 helicopters, additional Starlinks, 20 diesel trash pumps, and additional supplies like tarps, fans, and dehumidifiers. Cut and
confidence, but the window does open for something to maybe try to drift northward, and I would think Florida would be the place to watch. But certainly we have to watch the southern Gulf as well, and maybe south of Louisiana. Texas here probably fine, but just something.
Okay, my name is Jackie. We got another.
Let's see what this one's got.
Sponsored, response happening immediately. So that's a huge difference.
They have the infrastructure in place. You can see it on the way in. Clearly, we're already.
They actually get involved and do something. And Steve, called us with you could hear the tears as we were saying, it's just amazing, you guys. We were able to fund these helicopters. It's really happening in real time last week. He was just so ecstatic that they didn't have to
damage that wasn't even repaired before this one came in. So we have a long way to go, and it's really refreshing to see that this has not just devolved into controversy and politics at this point. And one of the things I want to hit on in North Carolina, so there are a lot of moving parts. People are still kind of digging out and picking through things to see who's at fault. Was anybody at fault? Was this just truly a natural disaster? And some of the local reporting in Charlotte was reporting this. Helene flooding damages Mountain Island Lake homes. Some blame Duke Energy for it. Duke Energy is the hydroelectric dam company. They run about 11 lake system, and all of these systems come down from the mountain, they go into the ocean, but they're grabbing energy from this flowing water that time. But there are these lake systems that they can control somewhat the levels of water in these dams. And so when we saw the people experience these gushing waters coming down, a lot of people were questioning, was there some issues with the dams?
Please like the video, guys.
And you go into this article, and they're quoting some residents.
If you could comment, that'd be great.
They could have taken steps well in advance to drastically lower levels at all lakes in the 11 lake system.
They could have lowered the levels.
They're allowed to, said Jenderson 64.
So easy.
But then they spoke to Duke Energy, a spokesperson, and they said, due to the size of Mountain Island Lake. Now, Mountain Island Lake is like the choke point. That's the one lake that he's run into, but that's the choke point.
You can redirect water
due to the
very
size of Mountain Island Lake and
all
the
it takes
historic
is
amount of rainfall from this
dynamite.
event. Any additional storage that would have been created in the lake would
Can you
not
still
have
hear that
prevented
okay,
the
guys?
flooding associated with
I
the
turned it down a
storm.
little
Williamson
bit.
wrote to the Observer, if Duke Energy began aggressively moving water downstream before a reliable or accurate forecast was available, it could have risked the entire region suffering severe water shortages, including drinking water, if the storm missed the region or dry weather persisted. Now, it goes on to talk to a river keeper there.
Please
and
follow
he
the
said
anchor and
the
subscribe
important
to
thing
the
to
channel,
remember
guys.
is Duke is not able to quickly move water through the system, he said. They need a long run-up time because the reservoirs were not designed for flood control. So when the forecast changes quickly or worsens, they're unable to adjust.
Okay, that's pretty good. Oh, geez. Let's just go to weather control. Weather control. There we go. Was it planned? Sure. 1 hour ago. This is the kind of stuff we're looking for.
Tampa's Phoenix simulation anticipated Category 5 hurricane. In ominous tones, a documentary narrator describes the devastation wrought on the Tampa Bay, Florida area by Phoenix, a tropical storm that grew into a Category 5 hurricane. More than 160 deaths with 30,000 missing people, upwards of 300,000 people seeking shelter, as much as $200 billion in building damage. The devastation to the region is almost unimaginable, the narrator intones. Phoenix was imaginary, a part of a 2009 government preparation exercise for a killer hurricane before. Now this hurts. It predicted damage to more.
That is the most boring son of a bitch. Let's try this.
Welcome to Wolfman Chronicles.
Can distribute 100 tons of toxic material into the skies to seed cloud moisture in a single payload. So they're two very different animals, and the local publicized weather modification operations are simply used as a smokescreen to mask the unimaginably larger climate intervention operations. So, and again, we have, going back decades, congressional documents at geoengineeringwatch.org. One is 800 pages long, outlining the scope and scale of these operations, even going back to the 70s and before, and intergovernmental cooperation, even between governments with otherwise adversarial relations, is stated as such in this document. Document calls for blanket legal immunity for anyone and everyone involved with these programs. So again, we have film footage of these aircraft at altitude, nozzles visible, turning on and off. This is not condensation we see in our skies. All military tankers and all commercial aircraft are outfitted with a high bypass turbofan jet engine, jet-powered fan. 90% of the air that moves through that engine is not combusted. So we should see, except under rare circumstances, we should see nothing behind these aircraft. And we're just asking people to investigate the data, connect the dots. This is absolutely ongoing.
So let's talk about, I want to talk about Helene in a minute here, but right now we've got Hurricane Milton bearing down on Florida and overnight, we see this small sort of secondary storm now in front of it, almost like a twin storm about to hit Florida. Then overnight, we also saw these massive wildfires breaking out in the Tetons in Wyoming. So, you know, a lot of Americans are so frustrated right now. They're sitting there saying, why would our government do this to us? First of all, let's talk about Milton. Is there any weather modification by the government being used or directing of this storm into Florida from your evidence?
Short answer, yes. And if I could back up to why would our government do this? Why wouldn't they do this when this has been business as usual for decades? If we look at what the Washington Post published all the way back in 1977, the U.S. military had conducted no less than 239 open-air biological tests on innocent, unknowing U.S. civilians. That's what we know about going back that far. If you look at the nuclear bomb detonations in Nevada, we have peer-reviewed study now to prove that those detonations eventually caused no less than 500,000 downstream deaths from the fallout for U.S. civilians. That's peer-reviewed study. So again, for those that can't imagine that the people who actually control our government, which I would argue is not any elected official, it's those who control the flow of money, this is business as usual. And why wouldn't they do this? Why wouldn't they use weather as a covert weapon of control? If we look all the way back, Clayton, to footage of Lyndon Johnson in 1962, former U.S. President Lyndon Johnson, 1962, on film, on the record, ranting like a lunatic, stating we had the power to control the world's cloud layer then, 62 years ago, and quote, he who controls the weather controls the world. So again, this is not speculation. And we have other governments like China openly announcing their massive weather modification operations, and yet if you bring the subject up here in the U.S., suddenly you're marginalized. That needs to change. In regards to Milton, there's no question it's being manipulated, and there's a global network of frequency transmitters that have a repelling effect on the air mass that is heavily seeded with electroconductive elements. And if you saw the track of Milton, it got hung up a bit on the Yucatan Peninsula. There's a massive transmitter in Cancun, and we recorded the transmissions from that, trying to bump that storm back onto track. And again, once it gets near enough to landfall in the U.S., where the NextRad network then becomes the controlling element, we've recorded this again and again and again. Even with hurricanes like Harvey, for example, Clayton, you might remember 7 days in advance, they seemed to know where it was going to go and that it was going to sit there for days. How could they possibly know that unless that's the plan? And we recorded Harvey. We recorded the actual transmissions with Harvey, Ian, Maria, Michael, all these hurricanes and their interactions.
Somebody thinks it's a conspiracy. All right.
Technology. So
all right.
Again, it's not like we're speculating.
50-50 on the votes, guys.
No,
Let's
speculating
the
at all. So
votes.
these NextRad, we showed at the very beginning here what happened
over
with
here.
Helene. When you have these NextRad frequency transmitters, where are these? Are these on military bases, these installations? What exactly do they look like? And how are they being operated? And I guess by whom? Is it the Department of Defense?
What we know from, for example, congressional documents is there are many agencies involved with the overall operations of these programs, but they're all compartmentalized. So the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. There's certainly central coordination for the NextRad network, and that's visible from the manner in which you can see these transmitters energizing. They're clearly completely coordinated. We do have some of the transmitters on bases, but some are not on bases. And it's even with what we think are just new cell towers going up everywhere, we know from those installing those towers that many of those installations have 10 times more power being supplied to them than they need for communications. And we can see their effect on water vapor loops. They are affecting the flow of precipitation. They are absolutely a part of these operations. And Clayton, if you've ever seen the herringbone patterns, the perfectly synchronized or aligned herringbone patterns in the clouds in the sky, have you ever seen that? And sometimes you can see those in perpendicular directions, and that's indicative of overlapping transmissions from different transmitters. You can't have that atmospherically otherwise. And so we have the entire meteorological community, their so-called science community, pretending that there's all these new cloud formations, that all these anomalous phenomenon we see in our skies are just something new that nobody ever noticed for 100 years, and they name 18 new clouds going back several years. And I mean, the blatantness with which these programs are ongoing is staggering. And people think, well, everyone would be lining up to talk about this, right? The experts would all be coming out of the shadows to admit to this. What happens to whistleblowers? What happened to Assange? What happened to John Carrico? The person who blew the whistle on the illegal torture programs, he's the only one that went to jail for it. So no, people aren't going to be lining up. And we have, right now, Clayton, we have an illegal federal gag order on all National Weather Service and all NOAA employees, the nation's weathermen. Why in the world would you have an illegal gag order on those agencies, forbidding them from discussing any of the agency operations?
Well, and Americans sitting there saying, why would they do this? Why would the government direct this into, we can talk about Hurricane Helene now, into this section of Western North Carolina? And, if you follow Occam's razor, the shortest, most direct response makes sense, right? And if it's the Department of Defense directing these weather weapons and they don't want Trump voters to vote for Trump, I mean, maybe that's the direct line here. Why would they do that? Well, would it be to end the wars in Ukraine? Would it be to end the wars in the Middle East? They're going to be put out of business, tens of billions of dollars at stake if Trump becomes president. I mean, is that a leap too far?
No, I don't think it is. I would just simply add that there are other layers as well. So we have Piedmont Lithium in North Carolina that was hemorrhaging hundreds of millions of dollars because of the roadblock of the owners that were not cooperating, did not want that mine to proceed. We have Piedmont Lithium's contracts with the DOD in 2025 that were
going on. You don't know me.
Coming due.
I don't know you.
So we have the DOD pursuing that lithium. And again, why would we think that this kind of operation wouldn't be conducted by those who actually control the power in Washington? And I, again, would argue that's those ultimately who print the money. And we have other historical records of this, Clayton. For example, immediately after 9/11, we had General Wesley Clark, the former NATO Supreme Commander, with a list of countries that were to be targeted because of that event, a list that clearly existed before that event ever occurred. Subsequently, every one of those countries underwent a once in 1,000 year drought. That's statistically impossible without climate intervention. And to back this up, we have the leaders of those countries, in the case of Iran, on the floor of the UN, stating emphatically, NATO is cutting off our precipitation. And they can see with their weather monitoring equipment what's going on upstream. So again, why would we think this isn't going on? We could go back further to Project Popeye in Vietnam in the 60s, where the U.S. military was so successful at the flow of precipitation over that country that by the 70s, there were international treaties forbidding weather warfare. Not that anybody pays any attention to that. So again, for Americans that think that this wouldn't be ongoing or we don't have the technology for this, it's simply ridiculous. We have patents going back for weather modification all the way back to the 1800s. We have about 200 at geoengineeringwatch.org, 200 plus. It's an extensive list of patents and new ones all the time for everything from hurricane modification to precipitation control to chemical ice nucleation. Clayton, have you seen how much hail is falling that's the size of baseball and softballs of late?
Yeah.
That's not nature.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. So many people posting on social media saying they've never seen storms like this before. They've never seen, they're filming it continuously for minutes at a time with lightning going off every few seconds. Traditional thunderstorms, you see lightning maybe every few minutes. But for it to be going off, it looks like something out of a movie. It looks like something out of a Lord of the Rings trailer or something like that. So we're seeing all sorts of different patterns, and people are saying that they've never seen storms like this. Are they right, or are they just conspiracy theorists?
I mean, again, this is a matter of the emperor has no clothes. Again, we need to use our sense of reason. It's absolutely occurring. And as far as the excessive lightning now, we have an ionized atmosphere. It's much more electrically conductive. These particulates are electrically conductive. And we're talking about, based on our lab tests, working with the University of Minnesota, hundreds of lab tests over that state, and extrapolating the amount of climate engineering elements in the precipitation and projecting that globally, it appears as if somewhere in the range of 40 to 60 million tons of toxic electrically conductive nanoparticles are being dispersed into our skies. That creates more static buildup. Again, more electrical conductivity in the clouds. Now we have the clouds being blasted with microwave transmission. So it's the atmosphere is being treated as a physics lab and a war zone at this point. And on the chemical ice nucleating elements, which are used to temporarily and toxically cool down surface temperatures in various regions. In fact, that happened. That's another layer for Helene. We had an anomalously less warm region in that part of the U.S., while the rest of the U.S., for example, where I live in Northern California, it's been 100 degrees plus for about 6 months with no rain. And the no rain part is absolutely a result of climate engineering as well. We can see what they're doing on satellite imagery. It cuts off the precipitation to the west, and that plugs into the wildfire scenario. All these puzzle pieces fit together completely. And on the chemical ice nucleation part, if your listeners search Lake Michigan ice balls, for example, look at the photos of what we don't see on Matrix television, 75-pound perfectly spherical ice balls covering the shores of Lake Michigan. And this is happening in the Baltic Sea, the Arctic. That's what happens with a chemically nucleated element. And for the massive hailstones, when you create this ice nucleation process far earlier and builds it far faster, that's why you end up with that. And that's why now insurance companies suddenly are canceling everybody for hail damage, because now it's off the charts, just like the lightning.
Unbelievable. So let's talk about Milton here. And Dane, I'll get you. I want to be respectful of your time. Milton, right? This is about to hit. The weather modification here. You've seen evidence of that? The manipulation using these next-rad radar systems off of Cancun to get it back on track. It looked like it was going south, more towards Cancun in that direction. You say that it was pushed back to the north. And just can you talk about that? And then also, what is the goal with Florida? Why Florida, right? I mean, at the end of the day, there's got to be a purpose for this.
Please
so
vote,
why
guys.
are they targeting Tampa specifically? Is there some reason that you've been able to identify, or is that
YouTube?
That's in the realm of speculation at this point?
Good material here.
The Geoengineering Watch Center, we are careful to only state what we can back up with data. So in regard to the agendas and objectives, there are likely many, and behind closed doors, whatever is going on there for the ultimate goal is difficult to state. What we can state with certainty is these operations are real, ongoing, they're patented processes, they're affecting these storms. And Clayton, if we go one step further, we've had for decades patented technologies to suppress these storms, to stop the convection. We have products like Dynamat designed to reduce the convection and pull the moisture to the surface at minimum. At absolute minimum. If they didn't want these storms to happen, they would not happen. And we're not stating on the spawning of these storms, the oceans are superheating. Nature can certainly spawn these storms, although with atmospheric pressure zone manipulation, which is absolutely ongoing. Again, for decades, this technology has existed. HARP, for example, in Alaska, many of your followers may know what that is. That's an ionosphere heater. It's a weapon of mass destruction. It's not some benign research facility. When you can transmit 3.5 million watts, 3.6 million watts into the electrically charged ionosphere, which causes an electrical chain reaction, superheats that layer of the atmosphere, causing the atmosphere to expand up and down, you can create and manipulate pressure zones on the surface. That in turn can affect storms like Milton or Helene. So they have the ability to make or break these storms however they form, and they have the ability to direct them. And the reason that normally now, Clayton, you've probably heard the term rapid intensification a lot lately with these storms. Right. So what we see now is an attempt to keep the storms from organizing too much too early, where they're over large bodies of water like the Gulf of Mexico, because they're much harder to steer. And perhaps we saw that with Milton, because as you know, Milton spun up much faster and stronger than they initially forecast. And that may have made it harder to steer, why it leaned to the southeast and hung up on the Yucatan Peninsula, and why they had to bump it off because it spun up more than they anticipated, perhaps. So again, there's two layers of the transmission manipulation. There's ionosphere heaters like HARP, of which there's about 100 around the globe. HARP's the biggest and the most powerful. And there's the NextRad network that manipulates from the ground level. And these, again, two separate aspects, but all frequency manipulation, and all doing what to the atmosphere? How do we know the overall effects? And what we do know from climate engineering, sprayed dispersals in our sky. And again, these are aerosols. This is not condensation. Encourage people to look at the videos we have at geoengineeringwatch.org, up close, taken at altitude, nozzles visible, turning dispersions on and off. End of discussion. This is not condensation. So those particles have a oxidizing effect on the ozone layer, which is absolutely imploding. And if the sun feels extremely hot on your skin, on surfaces when you're in unobstructed light, it's not your imagination. We know we're getting UVC on the surface now. That's a DNA damaging spectrum. We're getting some indication there may be X-ray. That's the final spectrum of UV radiation, indicating there's a functional collapse of the ozone layer close. It's being systematically denied. And it's not from hairspray cans, Clayton, as we were told going back several decades. That's simply smoke and mirrors. Those elements are harmful. CFCs are harmful. But that's a drop in the bucket compared to what climate engineering is doing. And that one aspect of this issue, if we had no other challenges on planet Earth, the functional collapse of the ozone layer alone is a near-term existential threat, and climate intervention operations are the core causal factor. And we have the whole climate science community admitting that if we geoengineer, and they propose, the entire global climate science community is saying they think we should put jets in the sky to spray light-scattering particles. It will turn our skies hazy, dirty, milky white, just like we see. It will destroy the ozone layer, just like is happening. It will disrupt the hydrological cycle, exactly as what's occurring. But then they tell us none of this is actually happening yet. So again, we're living in an asylum at this point, and the ozone layer functional collapse alone is a near-term, and I mean extremely near-term, existential threat. And we're metering that UV, Clayton. We had a former NASA contract engineer working directly for us. He just passed away with state-of-the-art equipment, but we're metering this, and it's not being disclosed by any official agency.
We're under attack. And I think you brought up, I want to get you out of here on this, Dane, which is the wildfires in Wyoming. Everyone's focused on Milton, but then we see massive wildfires breaking out, and you say they're connected.
They're completely connected. So whatever the source of ignition for the firestorms that are now occurring, we know that climate intervention operations are setting the template for these fires to burn with such ferocity. They're cutting off the hydrological cycle to massive swaths of forests, just like what happened in Canada last year. We have these particles, an incendiary dust. A primary element in climate engineering patents is aluminum, which we're all breathing, by the way. These are nanoparticles. They're very bioavailable. They're very bioaccumulative. They're building up in our systems, and we know this because everyone we test, hair, blood, urine, are packed with these metals. So this cutting off of the hydrological cycle. We have toxic rain because aluminum is toxic to all life forms, period. Bioavailable aluminum, toxic to all life forms. And for those who get this from some in the science community that claim, well, aluminum is a common element in our strata, we should expect it everywhere. Not free-form aluminum. Free-form aluminum does not exist in nature. It must be mined and refined and dispersed in order for it to be there. And that makes it bioavailable and bioaccumulative. So we have soil microbiome dying. You've heard the trees are dying because of beetles, perhaps in the western forest, and they blame everything on the beetles. Beetles are a symptom of a sick, dead, dying tree. The toxic rain is killing soil microbiome, killing root systems, which is killing the trees slowly. The UV is killing the trees from the top down. They're studying their stomata, their respiratory ports, so the forests don't smell like forest anymore. You have no smell in the forest because the trees are not breathing, they're not respirating, they're not absorbing carbon, they're not releasing oxygen. They're dying slowly and they're dormant. So we have more lightning. We just discussed that, right? We have more dry lightning now because the particles affect precipitation. So we have more sources of ignition. And all these elements, as part of climate engineering operations, that's what's setting the template for these fires to burn. And to add credence to this, we have peer-reviewed science study. We have an engineering wildfire section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. We have peer-reviewed study actually advocating for the intentional burning of northern latitude forests in order to provide temporary cooling, burning forests as a form of climate engineering to mimic the temporary toxic cooling effect of a volcano.
I mean, this is what Bill Gates has said publicly, that we should burn the forests in order to cool the planet. I mean, this is the madness that we're dealing with right now.
Absolute, total, utter insanity.
Dean, I'll get you out of here. I know I said I would get you out of here a second ago, but I just real quick here before we go, how bad do you think it's going to be with Hurricane Milton in Florida?
There's no way to know with certainty because the storm is being manipulated. They can knock the convection down at the last moment, or they can spin it up further. It's a matter of drafting that storm. and eliminating any wind shear at altitude. So again, when they're manipulating upper level wind currents, they have the ability to do this. And below the areas that are baking, and this is part of the wind current and pressure zone manipulation. You see in the west here, Clayton, I mean, we are baking. It's off the charts. And so climate engineering can augment that. And we're not denying other sources of damage to the planet at geoengineeringwatch.org. I want to make that clear. We recognize we've been really poor stewards of the planet, period. There's no way to really deny that. I mean, we're contaminating everything and cutting down forests, and there's a lot of problems that need to be addressed. But that being said, the intentional toxic intervention in the planet's life support systems is pounding the nails into our collective coffins, contaminating every breath we take. So under these high-pressure domes, which I described earlier, when you have an ionosphere heater causing this electrical chain reaction in the ionosphere, pushing that air down under a high-pressure heat dome, and that's what we're experiencing here in the West, and that can crush the convection in a cyclone as well. So they have so many levers at their disposal, Clayton, and we can, again, speculate about all the various agendas and objectives being carried out. But the fact that these operations are totally and completely out of control, off the rails, this is a headless, heartless, soulless cancer that is, at this point, again, completely out of control. And Clayton, I'm sure you hear people say, well, why would they do this to themselves? We hear it all the time at geoengineeringwatch.org. Why would they, aka those who print the money, do this to themselves? And I would point out, how much have they done to themselves already? Detonating 2,400 nuclear bombs that contaminated everything and everyone, including, quote, them, those behind these operations. We have Fukushima, triple nuclear meltdown, no technology to fix it, no end in sight. Chernobyl's about to rear its head again because the sarcophagus is disintegrating there. We have 442 nuke plants online right now. We have 60 more under construction. And even in that, even the potential of nuclear cataclysms is connected to the threat of climate engineering, because now that our compromised atmosphere, which we just talked about, the ozone layer disintegrating, if we have a massive CME or coronal mass ejection, which is inevitable at some point, something the size of the Carrington event that happened in the 1800s, that would shut down grids around the globe. Now we have nuclear plants everywhere that can't cool themselves. Now we have 100 Fukushimas or 200, game over. So from every conceivable direction, climate engineering, again, is the most dire and immediate threat we face short of nuclear cataclysm. And even with the nuclear cataclysm part, they're connected.
Dane Wigington has been my guest. You can learn more about all of this at geoengineeringwatch.org. Dane, I know it's been a busy time for you, and certainly our thoughts and prayers go out to the people who are
You are either with the Republic. About the horrendous damage, and many of them pointed out that that is not Hurricane Alley per se. It's not an area that normally attracts storms. Can you help us understand this?
Well, the bottom line is it was directed there, as the transmission recordings clearly show. They kept that moisture corralled there to deluge in the same location. So again, these are patented technologies, and the fact that we have the entire so-called meteorological community denying that this is going on to protect their paychecks and pensions is absolutely criminal at this point. We know we have private defense contractors that are neck deep in the patents that manipulate these storms, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin. We know those two in particular do the weather modeling for the nation's weathermen, National Weather Service and NOAA. Again, both agencies have an illegal federal gag order on them. So at this point, this is an emperor has no clothes moment. That's the best description I can give for something that is so blatantly obvious and inarguable, can only be considered weather warfare at this point. And the fact that, again, the so-called science community is denying this manipulation is criminal. It's absolutely criminal, Colonel McGregor.
Here's one more clip of him specifically talking about Helene. Then we'll get into Milton. He can go wherever he wants with this. But it's a fact that they have the power to kill these hurricanes. They're bare minimum not doing that, which is an action in and of itself. They're in control of it by not blocking it, but clearly there's evidence with these flight paths and things that is being manipulated. We'll talk about how they're able to do that and more of them in a moment. There's one more clip. If you can do so, could you tell us about some of your recent discussions, conversations, briefings that you've had with political leaders from the states in question that have asked you what you think? First of all, what did they specifically ask you, if you could tell us, and how did they respond to your answers?
Yes, Colonel McGregor, I had an hour conference call yesterday with the representatives and senators from the Carolinas, and we presented the data to them to answer their questions about how this manipulation occurs. They realized this was not a natural event. They're trying to digest the fact that their states were literally under assault from weather modification operations that are clearly connected with DoD operations, and we can speculate again on the agendas and objectives being carried out, but the fact that the storm was manipulated is absolutely inarguable. We know that technology to stop these rotations from even occurring has existed for decades with the manipulation of atmospheric pressure zones. HAARP in Alaska is one example many people are familiar with. That's an ionosphere heater. That's a weapon of mass destruction, period. It can cause an electrical chain reaction in the ionosphere, which heats it to extraordinarily high temperatures, which causes the atmosphere to bulge up and down. The downward push creates a high pressure dome that can steer the jet stream. And the same type of manipulation can create low pressure zones. When they have this type of power over the climate system, they can make or break these storms anytime they want. And again, what we see now is storms kept weaker as they're over the ocean because they're harder to steer until they reach the land-based network of transmitters. And then we have, Colonel McGregor, rapid intensification. You've heard that term probably a lot lately because that's how they manipulate these storms. And again, we have Acapulco last October being the extreme example of rapid intensification, an insignificant low pressure system developed into the strongest Cat 5 hurricane to ever hit that part of the world in less than 24 hours, laid waste to Acapulco. And by the way, Hurricane John, which just hit Acapulco again as Hurricane Helene was wreaking havoc in the Carolinas. Not many people know that. So Acapulco just got dealt another blow. So again, how many agendas and objectives are being carried out when we know they can manipulate these storms, when we know they can make or break them anytime they want? And again, I bring up the oil infrastructure in the Gulf of Mexico that seems to magically miss any sort of damaging storm again and again and again, while the storms wreak havoc inland and on shorelines. It's not a coincidence. They have that much sway over.
Now, let's be 100% clear, and we'll go to our guest and give him the floor. We have the CIA director, 2015, 16, in speeches saying we can do this, we've been doing it, but we don't want to tell the public about it because of lawsuits. So it's going on. We have the leading expert, Dane Whittington, on with us, geoengineeringwatch.org. Right now, there's so many places to start, so many places to go here. So, Dane, I'm just going to give you the floor here to go where you think first. Dane, thanks for joining us.
Alex, good to be with you again, brother. Thank you for always staying the course in this fight on so many fronts.
Thank you, brother.
The American public and elected officials are beginning to wake up to the fact that the covert weather warfare assault has been waged for decades against them. In regards to Hurricane Milton and the method with which these storms have been manipulated, the spawning is a separate issue, the spawning of the storms. But what we can say definitively is they are steering these storms. And Milton took, we believe, an unexpected jog toward the southeast, toward the Yucatan Peninsula, where a massive transmitter in Cancun nudged it back on course. And we recorded those transmissions as well. It spun up to, we believe, earlier than they had scheduled it to. It spun up to the strong Cat 5 that we saw, again, making it much more difficult to manipulate. So it may have gone off course a bit from where it was scheduled to go. They're more difficult to control the stronger the storm is, especially over the ocean. Once it reaches land, we have the NextRad network that is more capable of steering these storms. And again, these are patented technologies. So whatever agendas and objectives, again, there may be about this storm, where it's scheduled to make landfall, we can speculate about, again, all those agendas and objectives. There's likely many. The screen you're showing right there, Hurricane Helene, and the NextRad transmissions that have a repelling effect on the storm. That's, again, what happened in Cancun as the storm went southeast, and we believe that wasn't part of their original agenda. that it went off course a bit, and the transmitter in Cancun, very powerful transmitter, pushed it back. And again, we recorded those transmissions as well. So bottom line is these storms are being steered, period. If we go all the way back to 1947, Alex, I know you know this, many of your listeners do as well, but Project Cirrus, the U.S. military's initial onset of manipulating hurricanes, how far have they come since then? And again, for people to deny climate engineering at this point is absolutely ludicrous. And we know even Project Popeye in Vietnam in the 60s, historical record, U.S. military is so effective at controlling precipitation over that country that by the mid-70s, we have international treaties forbidding weather modification in wartime, not that anybody pays attention to those. So, Alex, this is nothing short of weather warfare, period.
And then we have the fake environmentalists making everything about carbon dioxide, not atrazine, and nuclear reactors melting down, saying, oh, the weather's getting worse because you're not paying your carbon tax, literally terrorizing people with this. We have all the CIA reports going back to the 60s, 70s, 80s admitting all of this. I showed them yesterday. While you talk, I'll show some of the documents. People can just type in the headline from the document and pull it up themselves. It's at CIA.gov. It's at Congress's website. We're talking about a fact here. I interviewed Ben Livingston, one of the first guys who were involved in this. And I remember I was attacking HAARP and having Dr. Nick Begich on in 2000. And in 2006, we get a call from an Air Force colonel at HAARP. And he said, the director of HAARP would like to come on. That interview's out there. And the guy came on and said, yeah, we can control the weather. We can even ignite the atmosphere, but big deal, it's not bad. So they admit all this, and we have the patents. But then at one level, the CIA head goes on C-SPAN and admits it all. But then you and I talk about it, we get attacked, and they say we're crazy. But meanwhile, places like Dubai, for decades, admit they control their weather and can use Doppler radar to create rain or to steer storms. Why don't you explain to people how Doppler radar is able to manipulate and energize the atmosphere and steer these storms?
Again, it has a repelling effect, and that is extraordinarily visible from the NEXRAD transmissions that we are recording. And we recorded for Hurricane Harvey, Ian, Maria, Michael, again and again and again. And you don't need to know anything about meteorology to see visibly the effect of these transmissions on the storms. If we go to Dubai, thank you for mentioning that, is it just a coincidence that days after Dubai announced it was going to ditch the dollar, they get deluged with 2 years worth of rain in, I think, 6 hours? Is that just a coincidence? So we see this sort of scenario over and over and over. And again, when these technologies have existed for so long, and as a matter of historical record, and we have somewhat over 200 patents at this point right now existing, the denial of this is criminal. And we would argue at geoengineeringwatch.org that everybody either actively or passively participating in these crimes, be it an elected official or media or a so-called weather expert that is participating in the cover-up of these crimes, does that not make them also culpable? So at geoengineeringwatch.org, we are trying to make known who's authoring articles. For example, a recent article from the New York Times, Alex, from Christopher Flavelle, who did his best to marginalize this incredibly dire issue. He referred to the interview exchange I did with Robert F. Kennedy and tried to mock and marginalize that. These people are increasingly desperate to mask what can't be hidden for much longer. And that's what I would encourage those trying to share this most dire issue in the ridicule and resistance they get from family and friends. Know that this issue will be exposed. You can't hide this. You can't put it in the rearview mirror. It's getting bigger and more ominous in front of the windshield every day. They're becoming more bold with their weather warfare actions because the public so far hasn't responded. Even when you have a hurricane like Helene, that again, there could be various objectives there. The Piedmont lithium mine in Piedmont in North Carolina, hemorrhaging hundreds of millions of dollars with DOD contracts coming due for that lithium. The landowners being a roadblock for them, and now those landowners have been washed away, literally. So again,
and Dave, let me stop you because when I was thinking about you coming on the show yesterday, I meant to ask that question up front. So thank you for bringing up the most important point in my view. And let me just stop here, and I want you to really take your time answering this. You are, hands down, the last 25 years, the leading organization group with the scientists and others testifying to legislatures, Congress, you name it, exposing the real documents, the real admissions of this thing hiding in plain view. I am seeing explosive awakening to this in the last few years, and it's really at a crescendo now everywhere. People on the street, family, dominating social media, videos with hundreds of millions of views, just all over the place, talking about this. And so you've been hammering away at this. I've been hammering away. So many others have. And it got some traction. It's such a key issue. But now it's really broken into the consciousness. Can you speak to what's happening in your statement that they can't hold this back anymore? The storm of awakening.
Certainly, Alex. You and InfoWars have been so pivotal and key in helping to blow this issue out into the open. Your voice is heard around the world. InfoWars is known around the world. And at geoengineeringwatch.org, we're immensely grateful to you and InfoWars for your help with sounding the alarm on this issue. And because of the damage being done by these operations that is manifesting every single day in the DoD response to this, and I don't mean to implicate just the US DoD, we have governments around the globe colluding and cooperating with this issue. In fact, so much so that we know we have historical records of Soviet climate modification scientists touring the US at the height of the Cold War in the 60s, and our scientists going there. So whatever the surface tensions are between these nations, they have definitely been colluding and cooperating on climate engineering operations. So the bottom line, and what's on the screen now, I want to explain that quickly. These are localized, quote, weather modification operations that are designed as a smokescreen to mask the unfathomably larger climate intervention operations. So picture whatever particulate matter is going up on that screen, right, that's shown right now. You might have a few grams of material floating into the sky. Compare that with a KC-135 military tanker that's dumping 100 tons of toxic nanoparticles in one payload. So again, we have a power structure that's tried to mask the climate engineering operations with, quote, weather modification operations that are publicized, that are known. The single engine propeller driven aircraft, many times, Alex, with a few flares on the wings that might drop, in that case, 5 kilos of material into the sky. Again, compare that with a KC-135 that will dump 100 tons in a single payload. In fact, Alex, we've extrapolated, I'll leave with this, but we've extrapolated based on our testing at geoengineeringwatch.org, and we took a NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, flying lab to altitude, which no private party will ever get access to again. That was a set of extenuating circumstances and great expense for us. But we took that to altitude with top scientists. It's all in the Dimming documentary. We sampled what heavy aircraft were emitting. We processed that at Rensselaer Polytechnic in New York, world-renowned lab, found what we knew we would find, starting with aluminum nanoparticles. So working with University of Minnesota, with hundreds of lab tests, we have extrapolated what the likely global dispersion of these elements is, and that's about 40 to 60 million tons annually. So is it any wonder, Alex, that every other commercial on TV is asthma this, COPD that, respiratory everything? And yes, there's pollution. We recognize that. We're not denying that. But when you have this intentional dumping of nanoparticles that are extremely inflammatory to the respiratory systems of toxic elements, aluminum, barium, strontium, manganese, polymer fibers, surfactants, there's HAARP that you're showing now. And that HAARP is an ionosphere heater. It's directional. They bounce that signal off the atmosphere and bring it down in places over a great spectrum.
The director told me on air at the time they can ignite the atmosphere. It's so powerful.
Yeah, I've heard him say that, and we can't know the totality of their capability. What HAARP does transmits 3.6 million watts of power into the electrically charged ionosphere, causes an electrical chain reaction, which superheats that layer of the atmosphere and causes the atmosphere to expand up and down. Alex, you've probably heard the term heat dome, high pressure heat dome, a lot lately. We hear the meteorologists saying it all the time, right? So that's what you get from an ionosphere heater. A high pressure heat dome, that compressing air. And we're experiencing that in the West Coast right now. It's like living in hell. Temperatures never cool down day or night, and you have very little air movement under that heat dome. And they can circulate the jet stream in a clockwise manner around that heat dome in the Northern Hemisphere and direct it back down to other locations. So the degree to which the climate system has been derailed by these operations is total at this point.
Now, expanding on my question about the level of the awakening you're seeing, I appreciate the credit to us, but we're all in this together, and people are interested in the general public. Why do you think you're seeing such a mass awakening, A, and then B, just like the Manhattan Project went on for 4 or 5 years, they kept it totally secret, hundreds of thousands of people working on it. Well, we know there's all these other big projects, and we have all the CIA documents. I showed them yesterday. They admitting it was a giant secret project starting in the 60s. It even went back to 47, but officially in the 60s, going into full scale, saying it was their most important project, the documents I showed yesterday. And so we're trying to expose this thing much bigger than the Manhattan Project that's hidden in plain view. So can you speak to both those questions?
Yeah, the way you frame that is exactly correct. Exactly correct. And people who deny this because they say it couldn't be hidden, it isn't being hidden. It's simply being denied. Anybody that's not clinically blind can see what's going on in our skies. You don't have grid patterns one day and nothing the next with similar atmospheric conditions unless something's being dispersed in our skies. And we have up close film footage of these aircraft, Alex, KC-10s, KC-135s, C-17s, nozzles visible turning on and off. Nothing's being hidden. We just have a public that wants to be lied to and wants to believe those lies. And that's finally, thankfully, breaking down as the public is being personally impacted by these operations. So the quote, hiding of this issue is no different than pretending that certain medical treatments are, quote, safe and effective when they're anything but. For decades, we have the whole medical industrial complex going along with that. And it makes it easier to hide also, Alex, when you have illegal federal gag orders on National Weather Service and NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, all agency operations under that gag order. So the bottom line is we have an industry that, in the case of the federal weather modification or weather disseminating agencies, are being gagged. And in case of the local meteorologists, they're just concerned about their paychecks and pensions. And Alex, you're literally reading scripts. The skies you see right there in that video are so typical in so many regions. And we have the local meteorologists days in advance, sometimes a week in advance, stating that a day will be mostly sunny or filtered sunshine. And that's filtered sunshine. How would that meteorologist know a week in advance that there's going to be aerosol spraying operations on those days unless they're reading a script?
Well, then we have, while they deny all this the last decade, all these thousands of headlines, CBS News, NBC News, BBC, they did it in Europe as well. Oh, there's a project to spray sunscreen to stop global warming and to dim the earth, and Bill Gates is involved. So they admit there's a project, and then you've got the former CIA director admitting there's a project in testing, but we don't want to, quote, scare the public, so we can't really talk about it. And then meanwhile, there's just this giant program. And then they admit what? I've seen NASA reports the Earth's 20% dimmer than it was 50 years ago.
You're correct. That's where the term global dimming comes from. And for your listeners, most of which are highly educated on this, many of them might know this, but solar radiation management, that is the stated purpose for what is going on in our skies, to block some of the sun's incoming thermal energy. What's the end result? Doing something this incredibly destructive. They're destroying the ozone layer, and the single biggest cause of ozone layer destruction, no, it's not getting better. It's getting exponentially worse. It's not from hairspray cans, as we were told, Alex, I'm sure you remember back in the day. Those are harmful chemicals, but that's a literal drop in the ocean compared to what climate engineering is doing. So we have that by itself increasing the thermal energy buildup on the planet, not decreasing it. And what's the DoD do when you're destroying the ozone layer from these operations? What's their solution? Spray more to block some of that incoming thermal energy, which actually destroys even more of the ozone layer and causes, in the end, more thermal energy buildup. These particles that can block some daytime heating in some locations trap more heat than they deflect. That, in the end, again, builds up more thermal energy on the surface of the planet, completely disrupting the hydrological cycle. And I don't want to make it sound like that everything going on is just some project gone awry. This project is completely malevolent. There is no benevolence in these programs.
Dane, we've got a break. Stay there. Start over with that. This is key. I want to ask what the big picture is from the leading expert in the world, Dane Whittington, geoengineeringwatch.org. Save it. Share it. We're live now. Share the live links. When we archive this to X, get it out. We're going to stop this. We're going to take our government back. Stay with us. All right. Milton is set to crash into Florida sometime this evening. We'll be tracking it literally and doing a Saturday show tomorrow to break down the latest. Not tomorrow. We'll be live Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, intending to do shows. And then I'm already scheduling stuff in my brain. And then Monday, Dane Whittington, the head of geoengineeringwatch.org, will be joining us at noon Central in the second hour to break down the aftermath and all of this. So I'll be live Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, right through all of what's unfolding and happening. Dane, finishing up what you were saying before the break, you were getting into the fact that this is not just programs that accidentally went awry. This is a giant, massive project, obviously much bigger than the Manhattan Project, going on, as the CIA says in the documents I showed yesterday, for total control. We have a new report by Greg Reese where he has LBJ. I've never seen that footage, talking about he who controls the weather rules the world. I mean, this is chilling stuff. So please continue.
It is chilling. Sorry to rant into the break, but it's when one has been at this for over 20 years, this has been my life nonstop, 20 years plus. I've never left my post. This is a virtual fight for life. We cannot hide from what they're dispersing in our skies. It's not only disrupting, derailing the planet's life support systems, including the ozone layer, hydrological cycle. It's contaminating virtually everything on the planet, every breath we take. And Alex, if we consider the elements being dispersed, among those elements, again, aluminum, barium, strontium, manganese, polymer fibers, surfactants, for those that have seen foaming rain or foaming runoff running down streams and curbs and streets, there's surfactants in this mix, which is used to keep the particles from coagulating and sticking together. And we have diagrams like what you're showing now on many science sources outlining exactly what we see. Everything we see in our skies, and we have the so-called climate science community denying it. And which, again, at this point is absolutely criminal, and they need to be called out as such. And I've worked in the field with USDA scientists who I know well, testing soil pH values. So much contamination is coming down in our rain that it's poisoning soils. It's changing soil pHs in Northern California. And I have the historical USDA baselines, so I'm not guessing. But I've had these scientists say to my face, Alex, sheepishly, what do you want us to do about it? They don't want to lose their paychecks and pensions. How do you face your child? How do you face yourself in the mirror knowing this is going on and doing nothing? The film you just showed of Lyndon Johnson, 1962, former President Johnson stating on film and on the record that we had the power to control the world's cloud layer then, and quote, he who controls the weather controls the world. Of course they're doing this. Those who print the money, who control everything, they control militaries, thus they control countries, they control media. Of course they're controlling the weather. The covert weapon with which they can and are bringing populations to their knees all over the world and have been for decades without those populations ever even knowing they're under assault.
And you got interrupted by the break. Can you go back into your own words? You were saying this is not by accident. It's not a program run awry. This is malevolent. And then start over. That's important.
Well, it is, again, because many people want to pretend that there's good intentions here. They're just perhaps running off the rails a bit. That couldn't be further from the truth. These people know exactly what they're doing. In the film, The Dimming, again, available for free on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org, and that film, in spite of social media censorship, is over 25 million views and counting. So on that film, you can see me confronting the world's most recognized climate engineer, Dr. David Keith, at an international geoengineering conference after a 3.5-hour symposium of Dr. Keith proposing, as if it wasn't already happening, the dumping of tens of millions of tons of aluminum nanoparticles into the atmosphere. And what I confronted him about was, have you done toxicological studies of doing that? And he stumbled a bit and paraphrased. He basically stated, well, there's a lot of particulate pollution in the atmosphere anyway, a little more won't hurt. And I cornered him with that particulate pollution isn't aluminum, bioavailable, toxic to everything that lives, aluminum. And he then stated this, Alex, we haven't studied that. Could terrible things happen tomorrow? We don't know. What kind of a statement is that from the world's most recognized climate engineer? And this is the attitude of these people, Alex. And the second most recognized geoengineer on the planet, Dr. Ken Caldera, former Department of Defense scientist. We own an audio of him at geoengineeringwatch.org stating, in his words, what he did for the DoD, designed methods of spraying pathogens into clouds to infect the populations below. Think about that. And now we have pathogens showing up in the case of CV-19. We had 85 countries infected in 3 days. That's indicative of an airborne dispersion. We have Italian scientists that say they have found CV19 attached to airborne particulates. Do these dots connect? So the bottom line is, again, we can hide from forms of medical procedures that we don't want. The injections, we cannot hide from what they're spraying in our skies. And at any moment if they're choosing, because we have polymer fibers and graphene in our rain, that's in our lab tests. Those are used militarily for biological carrier platforms to carry a pathogen from the clouds to the ground. Why would we think the US DoD or those truly controlling the military, again, those who print the money, wouldn't do this if they become desperate enough, which I would argue they're becoming very, very rapidly. They could level the playing field overnight, Alex.
And these are literally mad scientists that are on a total power trip, taking control of society. We have presidents, vice presidents, CIA directors. I have a stack of CIA, Department of Energy, National Institutes of Technology, all right here. Showed it yesterday, admitting this. And then you go to their big conferences and they're up there admitting it there. And, oh, yeah, we spray pathogens on people for the government, meaning viruses and bacteria. And
I'm going to post another tweet about the same subject. And I want a different title. I'll add the link in myself. Give me more keyword-rich hashtags. Okay.
And then they just laugh at us. So there's this weird paradox, but also I've literally seen thousands of articles, as you know, you've seen more than I have. You were on this more than I am, but I'm not even looking for it. It's in the news every day. Oh, they are spraying with planes to save the earth from the sun and global warming. And as you point out, it goes through and bounces up and blocks it in. That's what the science shows is the opposite.
Yes.
And then the environmental movements are saying they're going to save us with geoengineering and Bill Gates is going to save us. And then we go, okay, well then declassify what you're currently doing. And they go, you're crazy. It doesn't exist. They just play that same game over and over again. But as you said, people aren't putting up with this now.
And nor should they. And as you correctly cite, the so-called environmental movement, geoengineeringwatch.org attorneys contacted every single major environmental group, Greenpeace, Sierra Club, WWF, all of them. And all of them stated that they won't address this issue because they don't want to lose their 501c3 nonprofit. That is absolutely criminal. For the record, this is what we try to instill in everyone to help us move this fight forward so that we build bridges instead of burn them. There can be no legitimate discussion of climate, anything from any perspective, without first and foremost addressing the climate engineering elephant in the equation. And if we hold to that mantra and don't get sidetracked from that, from different people with different perspectives, and the left is the hardest to reach of all, Alex, as the proverb goes, you can't add to a cup that's already full. They are so incredibly programmed that when they hear the word geoengineering, they shut down like kindergartners. Literally, I've been at science meetings that when that term comes up, it's like they put their fingers in their ears and start ranting, I can't hear you. And that kind of infantile behavior from the so-called climate science community needs to be changed. And the public that knows this is going on should email them with many other people CC'd a link to the dimming, so that they no longer have an excuse for denying that these programs are operational. Again, we proved conclusively in the dimming that these programs are ongoing. And for those that haven't seen this film, again, posted for free at geoengineeringwatch.org the moment it was done. And we spent well into 6 figures on that film. We posted for free the moment it was finished. But in that film, you have testimony from former U.S. Air Force generals, former government scientists, former U.S. presidential cabinet members, former Canadian Minister of Defense, all acknowledging these programs exist and are ongoing. And so I would argue again, Alex, that this is the greatest and most immediate threat we collectively face, short of nuclear cataclysm, because we cannot hide from it. It's destroying the Earth's life support systems, contaminating every breath we take. And even in regard to nuclear cataclysm, we have a connection here, because the destruction being done to the atmosphere has now made us more vulnerable to coronal mass ejections, solar flare. And if we have a major event like the Carrington event now, that shuts down power grids around the globe. We're going to have nuclear power plants that can't cool themselves. We're going to have dozens, if not hundreds, of Fukushimas. Game over. So from every conceivable direction, what's happening in our skies holds our collective futures in the balance, Alex.
We know Trump was kept out of all the different compartmentalized areas of the government. That's why they're so upset, because now he knows, and it's said with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., he knows how to get in there, and he's going to release all this information. Can you speak to that?
Yes, I certainly have high hopes for Robert that he will be able to make headway with this issue. We're in communication with them again now. I've done an hour interview with Robert. I'm thankful for his courage for addressing this issue, and we are scheduled to do another interview very soon. And once we put a break in the dam, and again, thanks to your voice, thanks to Robert's voice and others, very important that we all stand together in this issue. But if we put a big enough break in the dam, Alex, that they can't plug, we will indeed cause a shockwave around the world as we awaken populations to what their government has been and is doing to them without their knowledge and consent. And this, again, goes back decades, Alice. We have in Africa, for example, they've been cutting off precipitation to countries there for decades, bringing those countries to their knees and the populations, and thus forcing those countries to allow U.S. occupation on their soil. If we look at the post 9/11, Alex, I'm sure you remember General Wesley Clark.
Yes.
The list of countries that were to be targeted immediately after 9/11. That list clearly existed before the event ever occurred. Every one of those countries in the Middle East subsequently endured a once in 1,000-year drought. Mathematically, statistically, that's impossible to have that kind of coincidence without climate intervention. And we have countries like Iraq stating on the record, on the floor of the UN, on film, on the record, the leader of that country, that their rain was being systematically cut off. We see the same exact operations cutting the rain off to the Western U.S. So for those people that think our country, our government, that's literally a criminal cabal masquerading as a legitimate government, if American citizens think that they're any more important to these controllers than the Iraqis or anybody else, or the Iranians, think again. Think again. So the bottom line is there's so much undeniable data that this is going on, and we can speculate about all the agendas and objectives, but the fact that the American citizens are being subjected to the same weather warfare as the Iranians and others around the world is indisputable.
And of course, if you're going to launch weather weapons like this, you keep it secret. That's the whole point. So you have plausible deniability. But when they were developing it all in the 60s, they admitted that was the plan. And I just showed those documents while you were speaking on air again. Anybody can just freeze the frame later when they're watching this, when it's archived, and then type in the headline. You'll be on the government websites, CIA websites, EU websites, UN websites. They have, this world treaties that they had back in the 70s that are still in place. The CIA director admitting all that.
Yes.
But there's a point here, Dane, that I think we should get into, and it's why they do these giant Manhattan projects. It's not just the weapons they develop, atomic weapons, hydrogen weapons, weather weapons out of them. They get to create a compartmentalized breakaway civilization of government corporations that are aware of this, and then it sets up a system of corruption in compartmentalization that they can then build out from through concentric rings of the compartmentalization. And I was reading about books about Julius Caesar and their writings, and how they weren't just paying locals off for one deal. Once they paid somebody off, it was called a corruption because they had now corrupted the person. So they roll out the virus that's man-made. They roll out the poison shot. It kills a bunch of people. The hospitals cover it up. Now the system set the precedent. Now they've got those people corrupted. It's the same thing with the pedophiles, the Catholic Church, the Boy Scouts. And then they get a few of them in there. The church or Boy Scouts covers it up because it'll hurt the institution, they think. Then they're able to expand the abuse, and then they finally get control of the institution. So by having all these big secret projects, fluoride in the water, all of it, they then get full control, and then they can be the saviors when the society breaks down. So I'm not a scientist, but I read the scientific reports about all of the aluminum in the soil, and Bill Gates has a patented seeds that can grow in aluminum. We have a family ranch in East Texas. It goes back that we bought from Mexico. And of course, it was huge then, 20-something thousand acres in the land grant from Mexico. They paid like 13 cents an acre. And we got a few thousand acres left. But all the farmland over the years, as family moves and family wants their inheritance, it's sold off to a few thousand acres. And so that's all woods. And I've been going there since I was born. We used to go there almost every week because Dallas is closer to it. And it looked like hobbits lived there. Giant oak trees, that are 8, 9, 10 feet around, just absolutely gorgeous. Huge pine trees. You go there now, all the big trees are dead, all of them. And you go all over Texas, even East Texas, everything's dying. Almost everything's dead in Central Texas, except the cedar trees that grow in its place. And then I talked to the local scientists. They say, yeah, the soil is full of toxins. So, and I know you've done documentaries, you've done reports, you've had scientists go out and test the soil. I know it's happening even in Hawaii and places. Can you explain to people what's unfolding here? Because, I mean, again, I go to this beautiful ranch, and now it's just scrub brush everywhere because whatever's in the atmosphere killed everything.
Well, first let me back up to your overall rundown of the power structure, how it works, and how they've gained such control. Absolutely brilliant rundown. That's exactly what has happened. Those who don't believe it or simply have not taken the time to investigate. But that's such an important part of the component to understand how they've gained this kind of control. And that's exactly how it's happened. So thank you for that background on how we got here. In regard to the soils, yes, the contaminants in our rain, which are extraordinarily high. For example, in Northern California, when I began this battle, didn't want to find these contaminants in our rain because I knew then it would change the course of my life, which it did. I knew these operations were ongoing. My initial lab test of 7 parts per billion of aluminum in a precipitation test over the next 18 months, I had to test skyrocket to 3,450 parts per billion of aluminum in the rain. That's toxic rain, killing soil microbiomes, kills root systems. Alex, when the wind blows now, trees regularly blow over and the root ball is dying back, just like the crowns are dying back because the roots are being poisoned, literally. So we have peer-reviewed study to prove that when root systems are exposed to this toxic element, they shut down nutrient uptake. And we know that in the case of Monsanto, they're engineering aluminum-resistant seeds. And that doesn't mean that the plant doesn't absorb that toxic material. It means it just doesn't operate. Its defense mechanism is shut down, so it continues to grow in spite of this toxic element. And then we get to eat it. So the bottom line is, again, this ubiquitous contamination of everything everywhere. We have peer-reviewed study now to prove that. We have recent study that proves that there's PFAS, forever chemicals, in every single drop of rain everywhere. There is nowhere to hide from this. And in regard to the die-off, if we look at the planet's fundamental life support systems, let's start with plankton. That's the foundation of life on Earth, single greatest oxygen producer on the planet. Because geoengineering is destroying the ozone layer and releasing intense UV radiation, not just UVA and B, but UVC on the surface, that is wiping out the plankton. They have to feed in the upper layers of the water column to photosynthesize, and they're being wiped out from this intense UV. And I recognize there are other sources of damage to the ocean. I recognize that. But we're talking about the single greatest source of destruction. And now we have recent peer-reviewed study, Alex, to prove in the Atlantic, measured in 500 locations, plankton populations have virtually crashed, 90% decline. Geoengineeringwatch.org was the first to publish insect populations were crashing. We did that in 2012. The so-called science community tried to marginalize us. They've since had to admit to this problem. If your listeners search insect apocalypse, they'll find lots of data now, 12 years after geoengineeringwatch.org disclosed it. The UV radiation, again, wiping them out. All these roads lead back to climate engineering, and this ubiquitous intentional disruption of the planet's life support systems for purposes of power and control holds our collective reality, our collective futures in the balance. In the trees you referred to, we're seeing that die from the forest everywhere. Recent peer-reviewed study of the forest in Western North America, the fir tree being the predominant tree, they're dying so fast, Alex, that the title of this study was Firmageddon. And I think that title explains pretty clearly what's happening.
You don't like to speculate, but you said this is obviously malevolent. This is being done on purpose. We have most of it hiding in plain view. We have so many documents you could swim in them. But
yes,
they say in the documents total control. They talk about the CIA. It's just almost incalculable is the quote. I showed it yesterday. But reverse engineering it, what are they trying to do? We know the globalists want to cut off the energy, cut off the pipelines, and then not give us real renewables, not a real bridge forward. I mean, it looks like it's just build back better. It's the great reset, collapse things so that human populations die. And the easiest way to do that is covertly just poison the biosphere.
You're correct. There are many agendas and objectives being carried out, but what we would argue at geoengineeringwatch.org, based on the current trajectory, no one gets out alive, including those behind these programs. And the next question that comes from most people, understandably, is, well, why would they do this to themselves? And what we would point out at geoengineeringwatch.org is, how much have they already done to themselves from the detonation of 2,400 nuclear bombs? A key aspect to cite there is Project Starfish Prime, the detonation of the hydrogen bombs in the magnetosphere, and they thought it could collapse the entire atmosphere. Did that stop them from doing it? No. We're not dealing with sanity. We're dealing with a headless, heartless, soulless cancer.
And let me just stop you and back you up. For everybody that doesn't believe this, even William Shatner did a Discovery Channel show, and I later looked it up and actually found the U.S. Archives. We ordered it from the U.S. Archives and got of the original stuff in the 60s, Operation Fishbowl, where they detonated hundreds of hydrogen bombs in the upper atmosphere, trying to destroy the Earth's atmosphere, that to see if they could. I mean, think of that statement I just made. That is bonkers.
It is. Thank you for that example. And they can watch Shatner narrate. It's called Trinity, the nuclear bomb movie.
Yes.
And anybody who watches that and doesn't realize that there are elements in the human race that are controlling everything, controlling the matrix, that are literally clinically insane. And to add credence to this, from psychoanalysis, and this is straight from the manual, the study of those who crave power, that there's a collective, there's a common thread, and that is a, quote, near total lack of comprehension as to the consequences of their actions, even to themselves. So again, for those that want to deny this because, quote, they wouldn't do this to themselves, they already have, they continue to. We're not dealing with sanity. And again, if we stay on this course, Alex, we have precious little time left, and that's a mathematical, statistical trajectory. Again, insect populations down 80 to 90% now. Wildlife populations down conservatively 70%.
Here's another example. I mean, until the mid-90s, you're driving everywhere. My entire windshield, if I just went an hour anywhere in spring or fall or summer, I had to get a Ouija out and clean at the gas station the guts off. I now drive sometimes a 10-hour road trip in the summer, and there's like 10 bugs on my windshield.
Exactly. And about the bugs, and Alex, you know, most people know that the bees are dying, right? That's common knowledge. Honeybee die-off.
How do you like?
So we have peer-reviewed study to prove the bees are dying of massive aluminum exposure. They're dying of symptoms that resemble Alzheimer's and dementia in a human being. They can't even find their way back to the hive. And this is in areas far away from any sort of industrialized anything. So how much longer are we going to last? I encourage your listeners, again, don't believe anything I say. Please research it. Search bees aluminum, and you'll find peer-reviewed study to prove everything I just stated. Why isn't that headlines everywhere? And not denying farm chemicals are harmful to bees or other sources, the frequency transmissions, but how can such a massive piece of the puzzle like aluminum exposure be completely systematically hidden? So again, the American population and populations in other first world nations completely asleep at the wheel. And if we don't wake up fast and alter our course, we are going to crash through the guardrail, point of no return, which in many ways we're already past. But the bottom line is, with this issue, if we expose it effectively and efficiently, Alex, and that's the key. And we encourage people at the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. We have the activist suggestions link with specific instructions on how you can move this fight forward from your own home computer, by sharing links to the Dinning, for example, with environmental article authors, with elected officials, many of whom are waking up to this issue right now, and CC other people with that in the case of elected officials, so that official knows that he'll be held more accountable by more people. If we learn to play chess well, we play effectively and efficiently, we can expose this issue with the help of voices like yours. We would cause a shockwave around the world, Alex.
Dan, I want to do 5 more minutes with you before well-known actor and patriot Robert Davey joins us. Talk about the election and more, about Milton and about the last hurricane and what you saw in the manipulation there from all your research and the radar being used. Stay right there. We'll be right back to geoengineeringwatch.org. Please remember, listeners, you're not going to get this information.
Great revelation.
Facebook Minds is, and this is The Nation, the subhead reads, "It's the Jews, it's the demon," an assertion of first seemed a sideshow of the crisis, calling to mind her infamous declaration 2018 wildfires were actually handiwork.
You got to love the corporate press taking things out of context or pushing them to their most extreme. Marjorie Taylor Greene has been on a tirade saying they can control the weather. Wired puts they in quotes as if to imply the Jews, when Marjorie Taylor Greene was literally just referring to the powers that be, which includes corporations, special interests, governments, military. Let me just pause for a second, my friends, and tell you definitively that it is entirely possible to manipulate the weather using science and technology. It has been done for a very long time. Operation Popeye was an operation in Vietnam where, without approval, CIA was trying to make it rain over the Ho Chi Minh Trail because they wanted to have the rain wash out roads and make it more difficult for the communists to mobilize.
Make sure you vote, guys.
Now, the question is, can you make hurricanes? I don't think so. And I got to tell you, my friends, while certainly that may be the implication that many people on the right are posting right now, we'll talk about this. I see you, Luke Rudkowski, posting on X. Do you think they can control the weather? I know what you're trying to say. Nobody's bringing this up in the context of a major Category 5 hurricane about to slam into Florida just after a hurricane slammed into North Carolina, Florida, Atlanta, South Carolina. And they're saying there's another hurricane that could slam in after Milton, Nadine. Okay, no one's saying this stuff right now to avoid the implication they think the government or some powerful interest or military is attacking us with hurricanes. I'll just put it this way. Guys, maybe, but I'm more inclined to believe that we just live in a constructed universe. And I say constructed because atheists are going to call it a simulation and Christians are going to say it's divine mandate, it's God's plan. Whatever it is, we'll call it God's plan or constructed. Like the idea that a month from the election, with early voting happening now, two crucial swing states would get slammed into by a hurricane, wiping out Republican strongholds. It's just, the odds must be astronomical, certainly. And then another hurricane forms in the Gulf, which is extremely rare, and starts heading east. Normally, hurricanes form off the coast of West Africa and start moving westward as they slam into the Gulf and this area. They strengthen over the ocean. We saw that from the Gulf, and it's possible. It's happened before, but it's rare. So here we go. I love the first thing they do in that they try to make it seem like people on the right who are bringing this up are talking about Jews. But let's do this. The New Republic. MTG's dumb hurricane conspiracy takes on a sinister new twist. Oh, a sinister one, huh? Oh, sinister. Marjorie Taylor Greene's claim that they can control the weather was a dog whistle to anti-Semites everywhere. Oh, they can't help themselves. They can't help themselves. It looks like anti-Semites are really latching on to Rep. Marjorie Taylor Greene's conspiracy theory about Hurricane Helene. In the aftermath of the Category 4 storm, Jewish government officials have been targeted by anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, according to The Forward, a national Jewish media outlet. Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas, Asheville Mayor Esther Mannheimer, and FEMA spokesperson Jacqueline Rothenberg have become targets of anti-Semitic abuse online. Now, what they're doing is they're connecting Marjorie Taylor Greene posting that weather control is real to the fact that anti-Semites attack people online. We do not know that they are related. Last week, Greene amplified a right-wing conspiracy theory that the government may have manufactured the deadly hurricane. Quote, yes, they can control the weather. It's ridiculous for anyone to lie and say it can't be done. She also seemed to imply that the government had been targeting Republican areas, which Donald Trump also suggested. I don't know that that's actually true, that Trump suggested that they're making hurricanes to target Republican areas, but I don't know, whatever. Not only is this theory outrageously anti-science, but it's also built on an explicitly anti-Semitic trope. Notably, Greene's outlandish suggestion that lacks any semblance of reason. I'm going to pause there for a minute. What Marjorie Taylor Greene is proposing is within the realm of possibility. She's not saying that leprechauns emerged from a rainbow and started casting curses upon the land. She's saying that we have weather manipulation technology And there's an insinuation that hurricanes could be formed by that. Now, I believe she's incorrect, but it is certainly possible to manipulate weather. She's not wrong about that. She's also certainly not claiming Jews are doing it. They just love to do that because they have no real rebuttal. I'll give you a real rebuttal, and I'll be honest about it. Weather manipulation is real, but at this scale is an absurdity. Now, it's possible the military has technology that we don't know about, and they're much more advanced. They wouldn't tell us. The nuclear bomb was compartmentalized in the Manhattan Project. Hundreds of thousands of people worked on it. No one knew exactly what it was going to be. I've got the Life magazines. I have a big Life magazine collection. They're thinking it could be a death laser. It could be warships. It could be flying, big aircraft carriers in the sky or something. Some thought it could be a doomsday weapon. They weren't entirely sure. Information was getting out, but it was compartmentalized. That's a possibility. That being said, this hurricane, as far as I understand, is like, what is it, like 70 or 80 or how many miles wide? Let's pull this up. How many miles wide is Milton? 100? What do they say? It's the eye of the storm is 4 miles wide, and the hurricane itself is 22 miles wide. Okay, 22 miles. Look, Trump suggested, I don't know if this is true, but there's like a story where apparently like Trump was like, why don't we nuke this hurricane? And they were like, that would do nothing. The nuclear bomb would not put a dent in this massive 30-mile wide storm. I do not believe, even with whatever we have, we are going to have the energy output capabilities to create a storm of this magnitude. Now, I do think there's the possibility of seeding the beginnings of a storm or a depression. I don't think that's possible. You need what you need to make a hurricane involves all of the surrounding areas, and to direct it requires all surrounding areas, meaning when the hurricane starts moving in a direction, it's because all of the winds surrounding it are creating a path for this based on high and low pressure. So if you want to believe that the U.S. government or somebody is controlling the weather to the point where they're creating hurricanes, you'd have to believe that they're controlling an entire hemispheres of wind patterns. And that's basically, in turn, the whole planet's wind patterns. Certainly, there's some you could consider they can heat up an area, maybe. No, they're not going to heat up 50 miles of ocean to create the conditions to create a hurricane. I just don't believe that's reality. I've seen powerful lasers. We've seen the laser-induced plasma channel. That's where they have an artillery that can shoot a lightning bolt at you. We've seen amazing things, but the energy required to create a hurricane is tremendous.
What do you want?
And a nuclear bomb doesn't even come close. My friends, I do not believe it's reality.
I'm on YouTube.
But
I can't really
it would be stupid to try and claim that Marjorie Taylor Greene is talking about the Jews. So not interested in your ridiculous, garbled, fake news lies. Okay? That being said, let's talk about weather manipulation warfare. It's real. Operation Popeye, as I mentioned. It was a military cloud seeding project carried out by the U.S. Air Force during the Vietnam War. The highly classified program attempted to extend the monsoon season over specific areas of the Ho Chi Minh Trail to disrupt North Vietnamese military supplies by softening road surfaces and causing landslides. The chemical weather modification was conducted from Thailand over Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam, and allegedly sponsored by Secretary of State Henry Kissinger and the CIA, without the authorization of then Secretary of Defense Melvin Laird, who had categorically denied to Congress the program for modification of weather for use as a tactical weapon ever existed. It does. I also want to point out that The Guardian reported 13 years ago, firing laser beams into the sky could make it rain. Making it rain is not a hurricane. And laser-induced cloud seeding has been well known for some time. I was covering this. We were looking at stories for Vice back when I was there. This is a couple years later. Well known that University of Geneva had done things like this. Cloud seeding has been around for since the 50s. They use silver iodide to cause the water particles in the atmosphere to condense, creating clouds, and then it rains. In Dubai recently, they had major flooding because they overdid it. Now, if you were to come and tell me that a major storm flooded a region and it rained for like 3 weeks and then said you saw planes that were dispersing chemicals or whatever, I'd say cloud seeding's real. But if you want to claim that one of the most powerful hurricanes we've ever seen in this region was created by some nefarious group, I'm just going to say, guys, I don't believe it. I just don't. I don't think there's anything wrong with speculating, asking questions about weather modification and weaponry, and I think it is the utmost absurdity for the media to claim Marjorie Taylor Greene is talking about the Jews. But let's just, I don't buy it. Sorry, guys. I know, and a lot of people may want to believe that it's true, Believe whatever you want to believe. Tell me I'm wrong. Because I have people coming out and saying, what about this report? What about that report? But creating a hurricane? Nah. I'll tell you this. I believe God is real. I know, and now the atheists are yelling at me. The conspiracy theorist Christians are like, Tim, you are wrong. And then the atheist stoics and pragmatists are like, indeed, Tim, on their corncob pipes. And then I say, but God is real. And then the atheists are like, we're out. And then the conspiracy Christians are like, keep going, Tim. I believe that God is real. I'm not a Christian, though. I do believe that we live in a universe of purpose, and there is some sort of design, there is some sort of reason for existence. And I think it's fair to say that when you look around at things, and based on the math that we see, you sometimes start to feel like it's not chance. Like, how could this be reality? How could so many historically unprecedented things occur in such a short time? It defies reason, but not really. Mathematicians and pragmatists will just say, no, it is within the realm of probability that these things do occur. And I just say this, sure, but I believe things have averages and tendencies, and I don't believe that we're at the high end of the bell curve for 5, 6, 7, 8 years straight. Well, but it could, no, spare me. It is too fantastical. These things seem too out of the ordinary. The reason why people want to divert towards conspiratorial thinking about the manufacturing of hurricanes is because what are the odds that a hurricane slams into 2 swing states during the election, like we're in election month. I know it's stupid to have an election month, but we are. Then another one forms in the Gulf, the strongest we've seen, and it's going to slam into Florida. And now they're saying another hurricane, I think they're calling it Nadine, has a 20% chance of forming and then slamming the other direction into Florida. What are the chances? You won the lottery 3 times. So people just say, I don't believe it. I say this, look, I believe it is within the realms of math and probability that these things happen, but it is beyond what we would expect probabilistically. And it would be akin okay, maybe not. But as math goes, they say, over a long enough period of time, all of the oxygen in a room will move to one side. Sure, what, over 800 billion years? Maybe. What are the chances? How many millions of years to see something like this occur? In which I say, we are truly living in interesting times, and I believe there is something greater beyond us. I don't believe it is humans controlling the weather. I think it is just the nature of the reality that we live in for the purpose that we live in it. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm allowed to be, and you're allowed to be wrong as well, and you're also allowed to tell me I'm wrong, and that's the way we do things. But in the meantime, yeah, I don't know what they're doing, but I don't think they're making hurricanes. We'll wrap it up there. Smash the like button, subscribe to this channel, share the show with everyone you know. Follow me on X and Instagram at Timcast. I don't know, share the show on YouTube.
I can't stand the rain.
Okay, well, that's the end of my live stream as well. Thanks for joining me, buddies. I usually do 2 hours every day. Justin S is the host. That's my name. And Squanch with Justin is the channel. Throw it down, y'all. Get the subscribe. Get the fucking links and the subscription. It's time for a nap. That was a lot of info. And still exactly where I am. I think we're being controlled with this whole thing, but it's up to you guys. Leave it in the comments below. Tell me what you think. But for now, that's it. That's it. That's all. Well, I got 3 minutes left. Let me throw down one more video here.
Hurricane Milton is projected to cross over Florida, then go out to sea. But we all know that sometimes things change.
No.
FEMA.
But yeah, we've been able to control the weather for so long now. I think it's inevitable. And we can, the last person we were watching, he was saying, oh, it's hard to heat up a 50-mile area of ocean. No, it's not. You drop dumpsters full of molten rock all over the ocean, easily done. These are the planes that can coordinate themselves quite easily. That can all be done really, really easily. You can cool down. We know you cool down the clouds with the dry ice. And there you go. You've got category fucking 17 if you want, you know? I think the technology's there, and it's just so convenient. And the 2 assassinations with weird circumstances, and then this hurricane coming from the wrong direction, and all the factors and all the panic and all the controversy. It's like, just give it up. Give it up. What is the truth here? You know, that's all we're doing here on Squanch with Justin, is we're just looking for the truth. You know, and the videos right now that we're going through, like I said 1,000 times, they are just a baseline. We're covering the last 200 years of American mysteries, histories. And from there, we're going to get on to some more crazy subjects, some more esoteric stuff, and really dig deep into a lot. I've been into this stuff for 20 years. There is so many subjects, but you know, giants and the moon, I think, are going to be my next 2 subjects, because they are fucking fascinating as hell. Okay, I'm just going to leave it at that. T. Justin S. signing off. Be good. Keep your stick on the ice. And remember, if you can't fix it with duct tape, you're not using enough duct tape.